Hello and welcome to another episode of FTD Talk. I'm your host John James and I am a writer and campaigner for male victims of female perpetrated domestic violence. In this episode I'll be talking to Lee Marks and other members of the Break the Silence UK organisation. I'll be talking to them about their work with male victims of abuse and about their own experiences. I hope you find it interesting. Well, welcome to FTD Talk. And before we start, can you just tell me who you are and what function you play at Break the Silence UK?
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Lee Marks. I am the CEO at Break the Silence UK.
So my name is Josh Munro. I am the COO of Break the Silence UK.
Thank you. And before we talk about Break the Silence, can you each tell me a little bit about your experiences with abuse?
Yeah, obviously going back a little bit now, I was the male coordinator for the area that we live in, working with male victims of domestic abuse. And certainly through doing the courses and the group work that we did there with the male victims, it was only then that I discovered that myself, I had been a victim of abuse and just hadn't recognised some of the behaviours that I was put through with my ex-partner as being abuse. So it was kind of a bit of a roller coaster for me. So that's my sort of experience of it. And Josh?
So for me, so I am a qualified independent domestic violence advisor. I've been working in the sector for the last 3-4 years over several counties with male and female victims, specialising in male victims and LGBTQIA victims. I've done court support, advocacy, all the main meetings, child protection, say MARAC, MAPA. Yeah.
And you work with perpetrators.
So also perpetrators as well. The list ever grows currently. So yes.
So Josh, have you been a victim of domestic violence?
In the sense of emotional abuse, yes. That was a few years. So it was a few years ago. Yes. And
Lee, how were you affected by domestic abuse? And how didn't you recognise it?
It was one of those that, sort of, I think growing up in a house where, my stepdad was abusive, seeing that from a young age, some of the behaviours that I faced, I just saw them as being what was, the put downs, certainly the financial abuse that I faced as well. It was kind of like, it is what it is. So didn't really think much of it and just, carried on doing the things that I was doing to try and, work my way through just living day to day. It was quite a revelation when I first realised exactly what I've been through, because, the exercise we were doing at the time and sort of doing, I say it's a tick box exercise. It was looking at a gender neutral version of the power and control wheel. Just looking at some of the behaviours, and what we'd asked the men in the group to do was just to take a few minutes and have a look at it and just, tick off any that they'd experienced themselves. Now, I was learning the group at the time, and the chap that was facilitating it with me said, best way to learn, join in, do the exercises with them and just see what they're going through. And it was kind of like the floor fell out from under me, because as I started looking at this sheet thinking, I ain't gonna be ticking none of these, it was just tick after tick after tick, and I was like, oh my God. And it was only then the sort of realization come the end of the group, the chap I was delivering it with just looked at me and said, are you okay? And he said, I just said, no mate, I've just realized that, me myself, I'm a victim of domestic abuse from my ex-partner.
And you didn't see that at all until the group sessions?
Yeah, I knew things weren't right.
Yeah.
Just saw them as, this is just something we're going through. This is just a phase. we've had good times. I know we can get back to that. Obviously, things are just a bit difficult at the moment. But yeah, it was a real eye-opener when I found out otherwise.
And what made you write the book, Break the Silence?
So having had my experiences and sort of coming to terms with what I've been through and going through that whole process, and then working with male victims for the next 2 years that I was in post there, I decided to leave that post because we merged the service I was working for. We merged with one of the big female organisations, who then very much made the male position impossible to do. There was a cancellation of, agreements with the police for referrals coming in, sending me out saying you've got to go and find your own referrals and you've got to be supporting 40 men across the county at any one time. And I just said, for the level of support these guys need, and I've been doing this, that's unrealistic. So I came away. I went to work in substance misuse, progressed very, very quickly up through that until I got to a point of training and traveling across the country delivering the training. One of the things that kept coming up that people were talking to me about was domestic abuse, because they knew of my past experience of working in the field, especially with male victims. And then I saw the Alex Skeel documentary, Abused by My Girlfriend. And I'm not too proud to admit that I sat there and I cried all the way through it, because it was just like, this is still happening. Nothing is changing. Now, I was with my wife that I'm with now then, and I just said to her, this just isn't on. I said, all the years we've been doing this, and for men, nothing is changing. And she said, but the thing is, she said, you've got all this experience and you're doing nothing with it. She said, is there not something you can do? And I said, well, maybe I can write something. So I sat down and started writing. And before I knew it, we're about a month and a half later, and I'm looking at, over 150 pages. And I was like, oh my God. And that's when I brought Josh into the whole equation, because I sort of said to him, mate, having worked in the field of domestic abuse, and Josh sort of fell into volunteering in the same organisation that I'd been in just after I left. I said, do you want to have a look at this? Just give me your thoughts on it, because I want somebody just to make sure that I'm doing things right. And it was quite an interesting process, wasn't it?
Oh God, yeah. That was a lot of fun to spitball ideas and how we can approach stuff and how we can bridge the gaps and sort of like start conversations that like organizations and people don't know how to have.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It wasn't just that, was it? I mean, you were reading through some of the book, and it was quite good, because Josh came back to me and was like, right, there's certain things you've written like this. I think you need to take that out. Oh, why is that, Josh? He said, because if the person that is about identifies it, then you can find yourself in court. So let's take that out. And, he said one thing that was very apparent all the way through reading it. He said, I could see you saying it. It was just so unapologetically you.
Very much so.
And did you have any difficulty starting the organisation? Did you have any backlash from women's organisations or anything like that? Anything stand in your way?
Oh, what a question!
Yes,
kind of. Yeah, so certainly looking at starting the organisation, it wasn't, when we started this off, it wasn't in the plan. The plan was we were going to put this book together and put it out there, because we thought if it helps one person, that's a major achievement. But literally within the space of a week of having it out on Amazon, we must have started about 60, 70 copies.
Yeah.
And we had people starting to, we'd set up a Break the Silence email address, and we had people starting to contact us. And I sort of said to Josh, well, mate, should we set up a website and just put some more information on there and see where we go? And it was kind of like, yeah, let's do that. We did get some backlash, because, again, being unapologetically me, and seeing things that you see on social media, there were certain things said about men, certain things that we'd read about that I responded to, and we did get some backlash, talking on some different groups. We've always been advocates of, do you know what? equality. Let's talk about male victims. Let's talk about female victims, because actually all victims of abuse are just that, victims of abuse. So when we've tried to bridge some of those gaps with conversations, like for instance, me myself, one of the things that I faced is financial abuse, and still to this day I'm paying off the debts that were in that relationship, and that's over 10 years ago, and I'm still paying them. I got pulled into a conversation, didn't I, that was talking about, on average, how much money a victim of domestic abuse is left in when they leave that relationship. And there was this big ball of conversation around there about, female victims on average are left with £16,000 worth of debt. And I just dropped in there. I said, you know what? Yeah, I agree with that, because, both myself and my colleague, we've worked with females that's happened to, but so do men that are victims of it. I myself was left with a great amount of debt, and we had a lot of negative responses to that. How dare you come and talk about men when we're talking about women, was the first one. It was kind of like, I think your exact words were, here we go.
Yeah.
And then and even threats. I had one message come through to me saying, I hope your house catches fire and it burns down. And it was just like, do you know what? This is exactly why we're going to continue to do what we will do, because, I'm not going to be threatened by people. I'm not going to step back and not stand up for what I believe is right just because someone's going to make idle threats like that. So we had that side of it. We had quite a prominent person. I'm not going to mention any names because it's something that we've kind of laid to rest a little bit now, that there was something inappropriate put on there about a perpetrator program, and I didn't agree with the language that was used. That started a bit of a smear campaign running about Break the Silence, which thousands of people got involved with, but we soon put that to rest straight away. I had a conversation with the person involved and said, look, we've obviously got different approaches, but ultimately we are trying to do the same thing, and I don't think it's right that someone should try and destroy an organization just because they're a little bit different. And luckily it didn't damage us too much in our early days, but these are the sort of things we faced. Sort of, we had criticism when the book came out. We had people saying, here we go, another man writing a book about a man, how about you step up and write a book about women? And it was kind of like, okay, maybe that's something we will look at in the future, but this was our starting point. This is something we're passionate about.
Exactly.
This
Everyone
is something we
somewhere.
know.
Yeah.
And why do you think it is that I have several books on domestic violence and male victims, and most of them are self-published? Now, if you go into the shops and you look for books with a male perpetrator and a female victim, they're all published.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Do you think that publishers can't accept there are male victims, or what's your opinion?
I mean, they've been going on what society has fed them for the last 20, 30 years, especially when domestic abuse has been female-centered for so long, and they're still fighting the good fight because it is damn well needed. Because even when I was in female-centered services and not having sort of many men come through, most of my client base was female, and the amount of funding that's needed and the amount of refuge space and the amount of money that's needed to provide say alarms, everything that they need to feel safe, it just isn't there. I mean, it got to a point where I was trying to secure some funding just for like a £50 alarm, and it was just to and froing because funding had been cut. I was like, for the sake of 50 quid, can this woman please feel safe in her own home? It's insane. So I understand that it is a very female-centered thing at the moment. Men are sort of seeping through the framework.
Yeah.
With the help of us a little bit, definitely. Let's say with the funding issue, forgive my babble, it is
It's become a funding game, hasn't it?
It really has, because I mean, especially when it's dominated by female-centered services that have been pushing that agenda for a long, long time, and publishers aren't willing to take the risk of a different opinion.
Although that is about to change.
Yes.
Because obviously our book, Break Silence, Book Guide for Male Victims of Domestic Abuse, we released it on Amazon. We've had a lot of contact from people recently saying, why can't we get your book on Amazon anymore? That's purely and simply because a year ago, we got a publishing contract, and we are about to come into the final stages of draft work before we get a publication date with our book going into bookstores through a publisher.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's a massive step forward.
Yeah, someone actually took the chance and said, you know what, we've read through what you put in, this needs to be out there.
Yeah.
It's a very, very different message, and we're willing to work with you and get this out there.
Exactly, because it's always been a case of finding the right people with the same ethos and understanding where we're coming from, because I feel we're going to get a lot of no, you're just supporting men, why are you against women? Supporting male victims isn't diminishing female victims, because domestic abuse is a human issue. We say we support everybody. There is no, I mean, sure, there are differences in the way each victim experiences, say, their level of domestic abuse, the level of trauma, the level of death, and say in some cases as well, because some may end up with 10, some 16. No matter what the situation is, they say they are individual, but that is still domestic abuse. They have still suffered at the hands of their abuser, and gender isn't part of it.
And that's just it. You see some of the conversations going on, even within the female circles. We've spoken at events where they say, no two victims' experience is the same.
Yes.
Exactly. No two victim, not no two female, no two male, no two victim. Regardless of gender, everybody's got their own journey, their own experiences. And, it shouldn't, and nobody's experience should be played down because on the basis of their gender.
Exactly. Every experience that has been had is completely valid. Everything that they have gone through and everything they have fought for, to say whether it's been keeping their tenancy, keeping their children, all of it is incredibly valid. And the fact that they have survived that and are now rebuilding their lives, quite frankly, it's amazing.
Yeah.
We met some phenomenal people.
Yeah.
So both service users as well as dedicated staff as well. It's genuinely been a pleasure being in the service.
Well, don't you think the complaints that, you're concentrating on male victims, there are female victims as well, don't you think that's quite ironic, as Women's Aid on their website, one of the first things you see is domestic violence is a gendered issue?
Rubbish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Domestic violence is a gendered issue. When a third of all victims are men, and when you're taking into account sort of LGBT as well, which is an area that Josh really takes the lead on with our organisation, to say that domestic abuse is a gendered issue is diminishing the experiences of those 1/3 victims. I think, certainly a conversation that I've had when I've been talking to numerous organisations, I've played devil's advocate a little bit and said, when we're looking at bringing these stats together, the sort of questions that are asked are, has your partner ever displayed any behaviour towards you that made you think about going to the police? For the majority of men, they would say, would I go to the police? No, not likely, when you hear about the experience of men that go to the police. So the answer is no. Change that question. Change the way that question's asked to, has your partner ever displayed any behaviour towards you that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable? If so, let's explore that. Opens people up to talking so much more. The amount people have opened up to us by changing that question has always made me say, do you know what? When we're trying to bring these figures to the front, Let's change the way we ask the question, because I'm guaranteed that 1/3 figure will rise dramatically. And the other thing you have to look at, and this is one thing that has grated me for years, and I know it has Josh the same, because Josh is doing a piece of work at the moment. Any service that supports men that has a female section to it or approach to it, they will use a screening tool. When we merged with the organisation that we went to, all the men that were coming through to refer themselves, a screening tool was used on them to try and decide whether they are a perpetrator or a victim, to make sure it's not a perpetrator trying to get into the system. Where's the equivalent? Because female services do not use a screening tool to decide whether or not a female coming into referring to service is a victim or a perpetrator. They're taken on face value. So there's not even any equality there. Exactly. So you've got, and we know you have got perpetrators receiving support from victim services because they've just been referred in after making false allegations. We know because we've worked with people who have been experiencing that. When we worked in the male service, we saw it all the time. Yeah. Because if a female goes to the police and reports domestic abuse, the very first thing that happens is they get a referral to Women's Aid. That happens. If a man goes to the police, who do they get referred to?
Well, most of the victims, male victims that I've spoken to on this podcast, in fact, they've reported being a victim of domestic violence and been arrested themselves.
Yeah, that's usually the case.
Yeah, I'll tell you about an experience that we had in the area where we are. There's a gentleman that is known to both myself and Josh, also known to Amy, who's our female colleague that couldn't be with us today, who works with the women that come into our service. And over a period of years, this poor gentleman, he was assaulted so many times. He had scratches with blood marks. He was hit with objects. The police were called by the neighbours or relatives because he would turn up at a relative's house. And the police will come out. And if he was at home, what happened is they took him to a place of safety. That was it.
Yeah.
On one day, there was an incident where something was demanded of him and he just left the house. He went and sat in the local park, and she phoned the police and made a false allegation. What then happened was he ended up in the cells from one phone call from her with a false allegation. Nothing had happened. And that's what happened. Now, I had a conversation with the force, and they obviously, as they always say, we can't discuss individual cases. I said, well, I'm not wanting to discuss individual cases, but, as a whole, we've worked with you over the years for so long, and on the whole, you do a good job. But in cases like this has been going on for years. If you track it back, and instead of looking at these as individual domestic disturbances that you've been called to, actually look at them as a group. This is a gentleman that's been experiencing this for years, and nothing has been done. One false allegation, and you've got him sat in the cells. Now, what you've done is you've allowed this female perpetrator to have an air of feeling invincible because she thinks she can do what she wants and get away with it because there's been no repercussions now for years. And they said, well, what do you want me to do? I said, next time you get called, arrest her. And that's what they did. They actually arrested her the next time they went, but it took us to say something for it to happen. And she couldn't believe what was happening. Now, even though they're still together in that relationship, she has not laid a hand on him since because she lost that air of invincibility.
Yeah, that's what I hear a lot, that the police they don't even know what to do with a female perpetrator.
Do you know?
That's not what their training tells them.
No, that is exactly what I was going to say. We found out because we were both doing a master's degree in understanding domestic and sexual violence, which is very interesting, but it's also brought a lot of research into play, which is quite an eye-opener, some of it that we've looked at. And one of the most interesting things that was brought to my attention that made me actually stop, and I sent it to Josh, and it was like, please tell me I'm not reading this. That under what was known as positive police action, historically, positive police action for a domestic incident was to go to the property and, regardless of what they saw, to remove the male. That changed a couple of years ago. But as we know, as with any policy change or anything like that, it takes years for that to actually sink in. And what we're seeing is that positive police action is still happening, because what we hear all the time is, I'm being told to leave the property. I'm being told to leave the property. And there's no action the other way, which would be there. Because if there was an incident where it was a male perpetrator, what do? What's the first thing they do? They arrest them. So why is it different?
And in your organisation, how exactly do you support male victims?
Cool. It's where do we start? It's cascaded, hasn't it?
It really has, because we have a few private clients that have approached us, and we've supported, whether we've spoken to organisations on their behalf, being granted permission to speak on their behalf, and having had a few positive results from that has genuinely been amazing. For organisations to understand where we're coming from and to actually see the issue, or at least they've seen it for a while and now finally see a solution in us, which is lovely.
So what we've been doing, and what we started off doing, because as Josh said, we had some people approach us and say, look, I need this looking at, knowing that we work full time during the day at the moment, and we come home from work literally and we start work again, doing what we do with Break the Silence UK. And sometimes we can be up and we can be in meetings with each other till like 2-3 o'clock in the morning doing this. So we were doing email support, we were doing telephone support, we were doing advocacy work, and helping men where we could. Our two most, I'd say, prominent results we've had so far, which we had people approach us about, were men that were being falsely accused of abuse to prevent them from having contact with their children. And actually what we did is ask them to provide us with what they had, and there was so much evidence in terms of conversations on WhatsApp with the actual perpetrator that was contradicting everything that they said, and that helped those men get contact with their children, which for us was a really positive result. But things sort of escalated massively from there, because we were kind of like, right, what can we do? So we started off with that. We've almost finished it. We have written our own male program, which comes in 2 parts, which is freedom from abuse, which is the first part, which is understanding domestic abuse, really picking it apart and looking at all the behaviours over a period of 8 weeks, just to give men the understanding, because that is what made the difference to me in understanding what had happened to me, and allowing me to move on. Then we got a second one that we've done, which is recovery from abuse, which is a more trauma-informed approach, which is looking at some of those things to help people move on from abuse. So looking at self-compassion, looking at grounding, looking at grief and loss, and really giving some skills there, safe coping skills, to be able to start putting one foot in front of the other to move on. And we're hoping we're going to be in a position soon that we can get some funding in place to be able to start delivering that, hopefully face to face in our local area. But we recognise that this is something that's needed right across the country. So part of what we're trying to put together is being able to have the ability to deliver that online right the way across the country as well, so people can come in, they can get the support of the group, and fingers crossed we're also going to be able to offer some online support for those people as well. And that's sort of where we are as we speak in terms of supporting men. But that's really the only the starting block of Break the Silence, because not only do we support victims, we support professionals, and now we started writing training courses. We have the ability to go out and train organisations within their staff environment, so we go in and spend the whole day with them. But we also do online seminars, which we're going to be starting to put out soon for people to be able to access, on numerous things around domestic abuse. So looking at male victims, looking at impact on children, looking at how to support them, looking at domestic abuse and how it affects the workplace, domestic abuse in a school environment, And all of our courses as well are going to be, most of them already are, but we're going through the process, continued professional development accredited. So there's more and more happening all the time. And we've got some big plans that we're hoping within the next year we can get into place with our own organisation as well.
Well, that answers my question of what's the future of Break the Silence?
What isn't the future of Break the Silence?
Yes. Very true.
I think if we were to sum up our long-term goal, it would be to smash down those doors that are genderizing services, that are taking support away from any victim whatsoever. We've got quite close links with the Paul Laval Foundation up in the Wirral, and the way they run their project up there is phenomenal. And that is a group of people that are just so inspirational. And looking at where they started from, you know, I met Paul's mum. I've spoke to Paul's brother, and you know what? Those are experiences that I will never forget. You know, to have them say, you know, thank you for what you're doing, thank you for the book, thank you for trying to help, man. It's kind of that real spur to, you know, go and do that step forward. And we have this vision that what they've established there, we'd like to see right across the country. For us here in Worcestershire, obviously supporting all genders, we'd like to do it for both genders. So we have an alternative kind of service that isn't saying, oh, it's got to be male, it's got to be female. This is, you know, we're here for all victims. You know, we're going to put groups on for you. We're going to give you a place to go. We're going to try and help you establish social connections with people.
Yeah.
You know, and as well with a book, I can't say what publishing house it is, and that's really frustrating because we ain't had permission yet.
No.
But they do have offices on 4 different continents. So there is the possibility that if Break the Silence as a book does well in this country, that it's going to go out to other continents as well. So, you know, Break the Silence could be global.
Yeah.
Great. That's a great image to have, isn't it? Because
it'll be,
it is worldwide.
It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
It's going to be so good.
Well, we spoke earlier about the societal view of female victim and male abuser.
Yeah.
It seems to be an unwavering reality for most. And I'm talking about the police as well, especially with my experience and with the experience of other men that I've spoken to. But how do we change that? How do we change societal's view of who's a victim and who isn't? And how do we change the police?
From the inside, because I mean, some of their practices, policies, tad outdated, because it's a very sort of one solution fits all. Because I understand trying to fit the demand of societal individual differences and an ever-evolving police force and ever-evolving society is a headache in itself, as you know, at least trying to manage that in a simple way, or at least, you know, make it easy for say like recruiting new officers or providing new training, or, you know, updating, say, those who have been in the force for decades. That older approach will seep into current policing, and especially if, you know, they've got some of the young bobbies with them, it is always sort of like who you're with, what sort of transfers, and, you know, back in the good old days, or oh, it's only a domestic, and oh, it's behind closed doors, oh, we don't get involved with that, oh no, look at him, he's looking a bit dodgy, we'll get him out. All of this mixture.
It's got to be said, it's not all officers though, is it?
Oh, no, very true. I've met some phenomenal officers.
Yeah.
Who've been absolutely brilliant and actually very forward thinking in the force. And it's very much just sort of, you know, who's your top man? And they're like, how can I push you in front of him? Because this is where this needs to go.
I think you look at some of those referrals we used to get from the police, I remember one in particular that when it came in, some of our female colleagues in the office laughed about it when we were working for the service, because it was an incident that had been written down as a domestic that had happened at Christmas. One of the neighbours had phoned because they could hear shouting and threats coming from next door over a burnt Christmas turkey, because to all intents and purposes, from what we had from the report, the man had been asked to watch the turkey and made sure it hadn't burned, and because it had, all hell had broken loose. But actually, a lot of our female clients may have laughed about that and said, "Oh, seriously, if that's the best they can do for a male victim, that's shocking." But when we had the chance to speak to him, there was a lot more going on and underneath just that one incident of burning a turkey. And it was quite clearly, here was a man that was suffering domestic abuse. Now, there might be the odd little incident like that people might see, but it's about being open-minded to it. Some of these officers, look at that officer that sent that form across. That is a good officer. That is someone that's looked at that and gone, that could potentially be an incident there. I believe there's more to that than meets the eye. And I say, well done you. But Josh hit the nail on the head and said, when you're talking about the old school officers, the only way you're going to change is by delivering up-to-date, innovative training. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that deliver the training and get those contracts to deliver the training to the police are from feminist-fronted organizations. So the majority of the training is talking about female victims. I cannot count how many times I've been on the training course, or a colleague of mine had been on a training course where they said, one of the first things they said was, we accept there can be male victims of domestic abuse, but as female victims are disproportionately more affected, our training is going to be focusing on she as female, as victim, he as perpetrator.
And it's interesting.
And it's kind of said, well, why can you not deliver a training course which doesn't say he or she and refers to victim, perpetrator? Why do you need to put a gender in there? Because actually, it can be any gender, which is our way of approaching things.
Exactly. So understanding the differences and the synchronicities of each gender is incredibly important when discussing the dynamics of the abuse. But both genders, all genders, experience the abuse. So
I think if you look at bigger, wider society, though, we've had a conversation with someone recently, which really, we do have a lot of conversations, but occasionally you get those ones where when you finish it, you sit back and you think, wow, that really made sense. That really made a point. And quite a few people within this conversation were saying, do you know what? Look at the movement of feminism, look where it came from, and look at all the years of doing what they had to do to make a difference. And, rightfully so, because back when it first started, there was a lot of inequality that was there. But I think what's happened, instead of bringing it level, what's happened is it's kept going. And it's now surpassed. And, talking to other organizations like Split the Difference, where they've got that physical evidence that they found that shows all these different areas right across the world where actually men are experiencing inequality in things like housing, in terms of law. So many of the big areas, there's just been too much go one way. And a lot of people are saying what we need is a combined effort of all those that support men, that are not afraid to come together and say, no, do you know what? We're not going to accept this anymore. There has to be equality for everybody. And it might take a combined movement that continues to go for many, many years, probably well after me and Josh have even stopped doing the work that we're doing, to keep that going, to try and bring that equality there.
I think, Josh, you're right that male victims and female victims are totally different, and the way that it should be treated is totally different. So I think gender equity is probably what we're looking for, do you think, rather than equality?
I'd say so in that sense, because again, like on a sort of like individual differences basis, because the way we see it, obviously, we also incorporate, say, LGBTQIA, say, the disabled, again, of say all and any gender, but also understanding that person's experiences and like how society views them, how the police may view them, how social services may view them, and what support is available to them, and what can be the best steps forward for them. Back when I was in Warwickshire, I brought a case to Marac that the chair, who was DC, actually, he did not understand mainly because the dynamic was between two men, say in a gay relationship. Having the support of my colleague there, who was well respected in the police and a very forward thinking chap, he was able to sort of actually give the nod. So actually, the lad's right, have a listen, was wonderful. And to be able to discuss the dynamics. So, he's replaced his door himself. He's pulled away from police support. Why is this even here? It's like, well, his partner was waited in his address for him with a knife, threatened that if he couldn't have him, no one could. He withdrew from police because the relationship between gay men and the police hasn't been great since the dawn of time. And how things have evolved now, yes, but because this man was 50s, in his 50s, he's not had the best relationship with the police since being a young man. And then to come out as gay, be in relationships, and to experience abuse within those relationships and have nowhere to turn, or at least if they do turn to the police, we're expected just to dig it out with a bit of fisticuffs and move on. But so having that conversation with that DC, as a 24-year-old young professional, he's sort of just sort of started in the field, youngest person in the room by at least 25 years. All these big wigs in the police, housing everyone. Actually, this is why he's pulled away from the police. Their response was subpar. X, Y, Z, all these points, and having provided positive support for him, but at least also cluing police in on how they can do better next time, and also how to deal, or at least make improvements in the current case.
I think you hit on a really important point there, and I think that's something that we need to sort of needs to be explored, because you made the point there, didn't you, that didn't have a great relationship with the police. There was nowhere to go. And I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about equality in service, because, we've recently had an email that I sent off to the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's office that said one of the things that they're looking at is a 24-hour domestic abuse helpline for men. Everybody that we know that works within that industry says, well, that's good, as long as it is an organisation that is trained to support men, and isn't an organisation that's going to go, right, first thing we need to do then is let's do this screening tool just to find out whether you are or not a victim or perpetrator, because they can get the help. But the big question is having that there and saying, look, what we're looking at doing is this big domestic abuse helpline just for men. But the big question is, and then?
Yeah.
Because, it's all right having a helpline just to get a little bit of advice, a little bit of guidance, but then what?
Exactly.
Where do they go from there?
Exactly.
Where are the support services for them from there?
Exactly. It's not setting a foundation for them to build up from.
Yeah. We've had so many conversations, and we've in the past we've put so many people towards Mankind's helpline, which, as we know, gets no funding from government. And then why set up a new helpline? Why spend money setting up a new 24-hour helpline when you've got one that is recognised already, that you could invest some money into to develop their services, and then take the rest of that money and let's start looking at the delivering, and then.
Yeah.
Very similar to what they do at the Paul Laval Foundation, because they have the and then support from the helpline. And that is what is needed.
Exactly.
And how do we move forward? I don't know whether you have an answer for this, but with people like Women's Aid controlling the narrative.
I think we've got our own opinions on this. We've started putting out our, just from our own perspective, in terms of the research that we found through doing our master's course, because a lot of my assignments so far and my dissertation will be focusing on male victims, because that is where my experience is, that's where my passion lies. And there's lots of stuff there, but it's about not being afraid to challenge that narrative. And I think what it needs is for more people to challenge that narrative. The fact that some of these commissioning bodies have now started saying, we want to look at, gender inclusive contracts in terms of tendering processes for domestic abuse support. I think that's great. That's a start. But what we have to ensure is that they are going to be gender inclusive, and not like we've seen in some areas where organisations, as you mentioned there, like Women's Aid, have gone for the contract, won the contract, and then subcontracted the male contract to, let's say, a housing association, which is not a specialist service. And that has happened in areas, and that is happening in areas, because what that's doing is still allowing them to control that narrative.
Yeah.
So it is about being able to speak it, and we're hoping that through what we're going to do when the book comes out, and we do manage to get that bit of a national forum going, because it's going to be going across the country, that the fact that we're going to start speaking out, maybe more people will join onto that and start speaking out as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not going to be a quick fix.
Oh God, no. We can never expect our vision in particular to come into fruition overnight. This is going to be us going hell for leather for a while. But the fact is, it is so needed and so valuable to everyone that can benefit from it that we can't not do it.
No, I mean, we were saying, weren't we, that, for the money that's there for male services, and if when you look online and, you see figures like, we're going to make £500,000 available for male services, which is just, for us, it's something which is great, but it's also insulting.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the budget that goes into domestic abuse, and considering that 1/3 of all victims are men, there needs to be at least some proportional representation in terms of funding.
Yeah,
because what's happening is services that support men are fighting over this small pot of money to be able to provide their services.
Exactly. So we're all fighting over crumbs.
Yeah.
And it's not that we're trying to get, into the bigger pot, if anything, because as I've said before, female services need the funding. It's especially I've had issues with where I previously worked, with like contractual issues and not being able to afford like 50 quid alarm, all this sort of stuff. Having a separate budget is vital, but I also believe, well, we also believe that both those pots should be higher, because domestic abuse costs the country hours and an unbelievable amount of money.
Yeah, it's into the billions, isn't it?
I'll say it is,
and that's just how it
billions,
affects work. Do you know what I mean? It's
exactly, and being able to invest in long-term help for everybody, and everybody, say getting back to a violence-free life, doing the best they can, living their best life, is beneficial for everybody.
We see it, don't we? We see it quite a lot, that, there are some organisations that are quite happy to co-work together, and certainly try and do pieces of work. A lot of the work that we've done in our own time for nothing so far. And that's what it's got to go back to. It's got to go back away from viewing domestic abuse as a financial institution as such, was trying to fight over this funding and get it in, and losing the focus on what it should be on.
Yes.
And actually more people coming together. And that is the way I think we're going to be able to turn the tide and get people listening, and actually get people seeing the reality of domestic abuse. It isn't a gendered issue, because there are the best part of 1 million estimated male victims a year. So basically, by saying gendered issue, you're saying, you're not important. And we've got to move away from that. And that is a really dangerous narrative for institutions like Women's Aid to be putting out there. We are working on a project at the moment that we're not going to say too much about, but it's going to be revolutionary when it goes out there. In terms of our organisation, we've got myself, I specialise in male victims. Josh has worked right across the sector. We've got Amy that works with female victims, and we are going to be looking at bringing the whole thing together. We are going to be looking at discrediting that statement of gendered issue. And when we pull it off, and it's going to be a couple of years in the making, we believe it's going to make people stop after looking at what we've put together and say, how have we been duped into believing that this is a gendered issue for so many years, when quite clearly the evidence is there that it's not.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's changing people's minds, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's getting a whole new attitude, and people are stubborn. They like what feels comfortable.
Yeah. People don't like discomfort.
Well, yes. Any ideas that they've been fed since, say, like even from childhood, and any form of new information, new neurological pathways being formed and adjusting to this new information, and some people having to reevaluate, their core values and adapt and change like any other regular person should or need to, in such modern times.
Just look at it from the purest point of view. When someone's been spewing the same line for so many years and believing what they've been saying, after all those years, they don't want to suddenly stop and go, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to hold my hand up. I was wrong.
Yeah, that's definitely not going to happen.
Well, we've talked about societal view and what it takes to change that. We've talked about how we can avoid the domination of the female groups. What about victims themselves? I mean, I see people willing on this show, and people have contacted me about my book, and you've spoken about people contacting you. But is it enough? Is there enough people coming forward?
I think this is where the issue lies at the moment. I think there are plenty of people that are happy to come forward. There are plenty of people that will speak about their experiences in the correct forum, but there's also a lot of fear
Yeah.
You know, we talked about some of the experiences that we had through social media for just talking out on behalf of some of these clients.
Yes.
That's why these people don't want to come out and speak, because as soon as, because of there's such strong feminist movements there and talking about females, we've seen it and we've evidenced it, and we've had to try and support gentlemen after they've spoke about their experiences of being a victim, and they get hit with a, oh, here we go, the what about me? Let's turn the attention back to the men again. Well, why not? They're a victim in their own right.
Yeah.
They have to be accepted for that. I think we've worked with a few organisations. Our events that we do ourselves, we're very selective on what we'll talk at. There has to be parity for all victims in any of the events we talk to. And, you know, it's those sort of events that male victims will speak out at. They will speak about their experiences because, you know, because there's parity, people want to hear both sides of the arguments. But, you know, when people are reliving some of the traumatic experiences they've been through and they get hit with that, oh, here we go, what about me?
Yeah.
That can be very difficult. You know, that's re-traumatizing. Would we as men,
gaslighting, yeah.
Would we as men, have we ever been to an event where a female has spoke about their experiences and gone, here we go? No, we haven't.
No.
We accept their experiences.
Yes.
We listen to them. And you know what? My heart goes out to every female victim I've ever spoke to about their experiences, and I will move heaven and earth to support them, as I do the men. So why is it, if we can accept female experiences and we will support them, why is it when men speak out they get the, oh, here we go, what about me again?
Yeah,
it's just wrong.
Certainly the issue is always there. If we create a safe enough environment, the tipping point will be that safe environment, and I'm sure we'll have the argument, oh well, no, now we're getting all these, you know, numbers out of nowhere. No, they've always been there. The environment has never been safe enough. The environment has never been able to accommodate this level of processing, thinking, and trauma, and moving forward in terms of how they can actually move on with their lives, rather than sitting in silence and becoming a weekly statistic.
Yeah. I mean, I was only listening to the radio on the way to work yesterday. And, you know, they were talking about certainly looking at, you know, stuff being said about women becoming a crime in itself. Well, what about the flip side? There's no conversation about all these online things that you see, an online post saying hate all men, kill all men, that becoming a crime. And it should be. Any hate talk of any type like that should be outlawed. It's because it's being always put across as this gendered issue, isn't it? And it's just, that's where the problem lies. Look at the stats that you see on like the Mankind's website, that, you know, the majority of men never speak about their abuse.
Nope.
Why? Because of fear.
Well, that's where the numbers are skewed, isn't it? Because you can put out how many people report abuse, how many men report abuse, how many men don't even report it, how many men don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And how many men don't even realise they are?
Like me.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, this is where we say we need to change the way, the narrative that we're using. Because if we change the narrative and say, do you know what? Have you ever experienced any type of behavior from your partner that made you feel uncomfortable? Is it kind of against your beliefs? You know, did you feel really uncomfortable? Let's talk about that. Let's explore it, because it's when you give that sort of openness, because it's not so attacking, is it? In terms of a question, it's allowing you to explore. If we explore those types of behaviors that men are experiencing, I tell you what, those numbers are going to go through the roof, because it's a better way of approaching that conversation.
And Lee, any more books in the works?
Yep.
There's probably going to be a few.
It's like we say, it's kind of like Pringles. Once you start, you can't stop.
Yes.
I mean, we've got obviously Break the Silence is going to be coming out through the publisher. We just changed the fiction book, The Silent Truth, to it's a trilogy version now. So, The first one, which is about the male victim itself, is book number 1. Book number 2 is going to be out by the end of this year, touch wood, depending on whether I can get time, which is focusing on the woman that he meets and marries within the Silent Truth, who, to all intents and purposes, in that book is the heroine of the story, and looking at her backstory before we move on to part 3 next year, which is looking at the perpetrator's story. So it's kind of looking at all those avenues. In terms of non-fiction books, that's the long-term project that I was talking about earlier, where we're going to bring all victims of abuse into one place and look at it as it should be looked at. And that project in itself is literally called Abuse is Abuse and Not a Gendered Issue.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you've never seen the film Men Don't Tell, you check it out. Because that's the only film I've ever seen that talks about male victims of abuse, and that only appeared on TV once before it was cancelled by women's groups.
Yeah, surprising that.
So even Hollywood or the film industry can be controlled by the women's groups. That's how powerful they are.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Hollywood, you talk about films, you talk about stuff like that. Real sort of eye opener that was sort of put to me, where it made me stop and think, what? When you look at incidents, which, if you look at incidents of, what domestic abuse is in terms of being in a relationship, being a family member, being a partner or former partner, there's a lot of films, including children's cartoons, some of the big ones that come out, that do show violence from the female, one of the female leads towards their male partner, and nothing ever gets said about that, does it? But if it was the other way round, you'd have uproar.
Well, Coronation Street actually put a video on YouTube that showed how they did a stunt of a woman punching a guy in the face. But if that had been the other way around, they would not have been allowed to do that.
No. I'd be very surprised if they would have got away with putting that on TV if it was the other way around as well. Because it doesn't fit that narrative, does it? Unfortunately, for so long now, society's had this narrative of female victim, male perpetrator, that it's very, very difficult to get anything going the other way. And I applaud some of these soaps that have shown male victims of abuse.
They've done such a good job and actually spoken to victims and spoken to advocacy groups and have done such a tremendous job. Like so it was the male rape with David from Coronation Street, and
you go all the way back with Coronation Street and the Terrell story as well, all those years ago. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, completely. It's nice to see that they acknowledge the other side, and that will definitely go a long way in terms of changing societal perception of abuse, and actually put that out to a wider audience.
You could see more of it, though.
Yes, it would.
Not just once in a blue moon.
Yes, exactly.
It's accepted that violence towards women is commonplace. Domestic abuse towards women is commonplace. But, there are millions of men who that lifestyle, that experience, that experience of intimate terrorism, of walking on eggshells every single day is their every single day way of life. And yet it's deemed to be uncommon. It's not. It's common. So let's start getting, some of these organizations that are putting these programs out, let's start showing the real truth of it, that it is common. It does happen, and it's not a rare thing.
And on that note, gentlemen, thank you very much for a fascinating conversation.
I say our pleasure. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good, and all the best with Break the Silence UK and with all the upcoming projects.
Thank you very much.
We'll keep you updated on what we're doing.
Yeah, please do. I mean, when you get the secret project, when when that gets up and running, then hope you'll come back on the show and talk about that.
You'll be top of our list, John.
Yeah, happily.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much indeed. You take care.
You take care of yourself. Thank you.